Hello and welcome to the WASA YouTube channel. I'm Rosa Pons, Head of Communications at WASA, and today we have the honor of speaking with Professor Dr. Gordon Reid, Director Emeritus of Chester Zoo. Under his leadership, Chester Zoo has become a global leader in conservation, visitor experience, and sustainability. Gordon, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much, Rosa, for inviting me, and thank you, Waza, for giving me this opportunity to talk.
Lovely. Let's begin. Let me ask you to introduce yourself in your own words.
Well, I'm a retired zoo director, but I've had a very varied experience in life, starting out as a young volunteer in Africa on refugee schemes when I was only a teenager, and building up my enthusiasm for animals all the while through different jobs I've had in the museum sector, the university sector, and eventually the zoo sector.
You've been with Chester Zoo for over 3 decades. What was your first role here, and how did those early experiences shape your leadership approach?
I moved from the museum world, which also has live animal collections, to the zoo world. And it was at a time when zoo licensing was just coming into the UK, and which eventually spread into Europe and beyond. And so I'd been involved deeply with zoo licensing and accreditation processes for zoos that were based in the museum world. Some of that knowledge I transferred up to Chester. I was invited to apply for the job by Dr. Michael Bramble, who was my friend and mentor throughout my whole career in zoos. And I've greatly valued his support and his enthusiasm for the things that I wanted to do and develop at Chester.
Mm-hmm. In 1995, you became Director General and Chief Executive at Chester Zoo. What was your biggest initial challenge in that role, and how did you tackle it?
Well, I think that the zoos at that time generally, and Chester Zoo, were not particularly good at the interpretation side, so the collections weren't well interpreted to the public. Conservation wasn't very well explained. Understanding what the visitor might want out of a visit, particularly families with small children, wasn't well developed. There wasn't anything like visitor research at that time. And certainly conservation work in the field, apart from Jersey Zoo, was almost unknown in the zoo world at all. And I was with Gerald Durrell, the great pioneer of zoo conservation. I wanted to take the zoo in the direction of conservation in the field. I wanted to develop far better interpretation for the public, including interactive interpretation. So not just static interpretation where visitors have to do something to get the message out of the displays that they're looking at. And I also wanted to increase the marketing profile of Chester Zoo. We had reasonable visitor figures, but they were declining at that time. And there was a lot of problems with the misconception of the mission of zoos in the animal welfare community, including an organization called Zoo Check, which I think depressed visitor figures generally in the UK and probably elsewhere. So we needed to get the message out there that zoos, good zoos, are actually for good things, including conservation, education, benign scientific research, and animal welfare, of course. That's the bedrock upon which everything stands.
You've mentioned conservation and visitor experience, which are big words for the zoo and aquarium community. Chester Zoo is actually consistently praised for its visitor experience, right? So how did you ensure high visitor satisfaction while keeping conservation and animal welfare front and center?
Okay, well, some of it is very basic. We did research when we were redeveloping the zoo entrance, we did research on what does a visitor want when they first come to the zoo. And at that time, there were huge queues would build up. And sometimes people would have babies that needed to go to the loo, and sometimes they also needed to go to the loo. We involved all the staff, and we did surveys with staff, we had workshops with staff, and one of the cleaners pointed out that lots of people were standing in the queues. The first thing they need when they come to the zoo is very practical. They need to go to the toilet. And so I took her advice, and we built a toilet facing outwards so that people could come, they could take their baby and change nappies and things like that. So when they started their entrance into the zoo, they were in a relaxed frame of mind, and they were ready to receive the kinds of messages that we wanted to give them. So I think taking the stress out of a visit, some people may have come from very many miles, they may be tired, hot, hungry. You have to think about all of these things. And we have an expression in Scotland where I come from, is to see ourselves as others see us. And I think that's one of the most important lessons in understanding visitors and creating a wonderful visitor experience, is see how the visitors, the public, look at you and the zoo and the experience, and get feedback from them, a lot of feedback. And also get feedback from the staff, who are particularly in day-to-day touch with visitors, and they often have very good insights that aren't necessarily there for senior levels members of management who may not be on the ground all the time. So stuff like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, a good visitor experience starts with comfort, right? And
Absolutely, yeah. I think
definitely.
there's a psychological theory of needs, and if you don't satisfy all the basic needs, then you can't begin to have a higher level experience, which might include conservation awareness, and actually there's a whole area now developing in conservation psychology. What makes people come to a zoo? What makes people donate money to conservation programs? What makes people well disposed to wildlife, to animal welfare, and to sustainability? These are all key issues for our time, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And you've mentioned conservation programs. Chester Zoo actually runs many conservation programs. Can you maybe share one project from the past years that exemplifies your impact, and how do you measure success for these programs?
Okay, one program that we developed was with Asian elephants in Assam. This is an outreach program, and the basic general principle was that if we were keeping an animal in the zoo, it was a threatened species, we should be working in the wild to support conservation of that species in the wild. And I was invited out to Assam by an organization called Ecosystems India, and we talked about developing a program, because at that time an elephant was shot dead every week in northern Assam, so horrific casualty rates. And there were also orphanages for young baby elephants that were being rescued. And so we went out and we started not just with the conservation and welfare work, but also doing village level surveys to find out why villagers were in conflict with elephants. And the human animal conflict was one of the big problems of our time. And through our survey work, we found that elephants were coming and raiding their crops, and they were smashing houses in the villages, and so on. So we more and more detailed research, patient research, we found that elephants were attracted to villages because they could smell the fermenting fruit from small-scale breweries. And so it was the smell of alcohol, or alcohol being fermented to make local beer, was bringing the elephants in. Mm-hmm. And then they were smashing the houses down so they could siphon out the alcohol. And hey, they ended up a bit tipsy. So a drunk elephant is 10 times more difficult to deal with than a one that hasn't had a drink.
Yeah.
And just a strange thing like that. So elephants went on the rampage in villages. And of course, the villagers, naturally to defend themselves, would shoot them. So key bit of research was, if you're going to do brewing, keep it well away from the village, and then choose your times very carefully. Don't have buildings located near elephant migration routes. And we also found that with crop raiding, the elephants were reluctant to move into fields and take crops if there was a perimeter planting of pepper. And so these are a couple of the planks of our successful conservation work out in Assam, done in collaboration with villagers and with the local conservation agencies. We plotted graphs of elephant mortality rates and human mortality rates, and we found that there was a greatly increased elephant survival because the villagers understood a lot more about elephants and why they're important. But there was also a great decline in people being injured or killed by elephants. So it was a win-win. And I thought it was a very good example of how zoos can engage very, very purposefully in the wild and produce very good results.
Definitely. And also how useful research is to actually,
Absolutely.
make
Mm,
change
mm,
and
yeah,
create
yeah.
action. You're still very involved at the Chester Zoo. Looking ahead to the next 5 years, what is Chester's Zoo vision in global conservation? And are there any upcoming partnerships or projects that are actually exciting you?
Well, I think that they're still moving forward in the areas of human-animal conflict, and there's scores of projects that Chester Zoo's engaged with abroad, including with jaguars in the Brazilian Pantanal, where there's jaguar-rancher conflict, the same kind of issues we talked about with elephants. But also, it's very important to be engaged with local wildlife, both animals and plants, I believe. And Chester Zoo has been a front runner in local conservation. Um, there's been some wonderful work on harvest mice at Chester Zoo and facilitated by a wonderful member of staff called Penny Rudd, who started keeping them in the office, small things, but now they've been reintroduced back into the wild, and there's a thriving local population. The zoo has done wonderful local work with barn owls, which are a species that has been threatened in UK. And so if you see a barn owl now in the northwest of England, there's a fair chance that it's either a Chester Zoo bird or it's the descendant of a Chester Zoo bird, because they have been reintroduced back into the wild. So these are amongst the things that inspire me. There's a lot of work with invertebrates, even something as simple as river mussels, swan mussels, which do need conserved. And there's a huge team of people. I think the staff on the ground find that they're engaged, and they always work with the local population or the local conservation agencies and get a lot of voluntary support, which greatly helps the facilitation of projects.
That's exciting and sounds like a lot of good work is
Mm.
underway and
Yeah.
happening. You are a key figure in the zoo and aquarium community in the UK, but also globally. Former was a president, recipient of the Heidi Heidegger Award. Are there any tips you would like to share with young conservationists that are starting now their career in this community?
I think that one of the key things to me is cooperation, that people may have grown and developed in a particular organization, a conservation organization, but no one organization, whether it's zoos or NGOs or wildlife agencies, can do it on their own. A great believer in partnerships, and also if you can get local people involved, I think that's great. So cooperation is the big thing. And I think that human beings have a bit of a tendency to, we all of us have a bit of a tendency to be a wee bit jealous or a bit uncooperative. If you work in one organization, you want the credit sort of thing. I think you have to set egos aside and move forward in a spirit of the common good, working for sustainability and also for better futures for the planet as a whole. And sometimes you have to swallow hard to make these kind of engagements and also engage with, I mean, zoos, I think, need to develop more strongly as campaigning organizations because politicians need to understand what's important uh, and get the message. And that's how you spread it through the population and how you bring about long-term change, I think.
I really like that collaboration. That's actually what WASA stands for, right? We want to
Absolutely.
convene the
Absolutely.
global zoo and aquarium
Yeah.
community, advocate, being this global voice in global policy forums, making sure that we advance conservation and animal welfare on a global level.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good tip. What book or film or podcast would you recommend to young generations that might have influenced you throughout your career?
Well, there was a sponsored conference that we did on the history of zoos and aquariums, and it was called From Royal Gifts to Biodiversity Conservation. So I think it's very important not to lose sight of zoo history and where we've come from. And there's this WASA document which is available, might be available online. It's been translated into quite a few languages. So History of Zoos and Aquariums from Royal Gifts to Biodiversity Conservation, I think it's a very worthwhile read, and it lets us see how far zoos have come, what our roots and origins are, how zoo organizations work together, and all the things that we can be very proud of in terms of supporting wildlife conservation and sustainable lifestyles.
That's good. We'll make sure to add this one book into the recording. I'd like to finish with two quick fire questions,
Yep.
so you can provide short answers. So, if you were not in the zoo and aquarium community, what would you be doing instead?
That's a very difficult one. I actually have a love of old natural history books, and one of my hobbies is book binding. Again, it's a kind of conservation, but it's a physical conservation of restoring old books. And it's been a long-standing hobby of mine, and I'm a member of the Society of Bookbinders. So a rather strange and curious hobby, but had I not gone in the direction of zoos and conservation and animal welfare, and I think I could very well have ended up as a bookbinder because I get a great deal of satisfaction and relaxation from that hobby.
That sounds lovely. And what's your favorite animal to see at Chester Zoo and why?
Well, my very favorite animal at Chester Zoo was a chimpanzee called Boris.
Boris.
And he was the dominant male chimp. He was rescued from the pet trade when he was a young animal, and he's brought up in in Chester Zoo. The lady who brought him to the zoo, a lady called Hester Mundus, was looking for a zoo that had open plan enclosures, moated enclosures, which were at that time very unusual in the zoo world. So Boris came as a chimp who'd been rescued from the New York pet trade, and she took him from New York and she brought him to Chester Zoo, and he grew up in the very natural chimp colony that we have at Chester, and which has actually been studied in partnership with Jane Goodall, for example. Boris is gradually axed his way up the hierarchy in the chimp community and became the dominant male. And when I was the zoo director, every day I went round the zoo, Boris would come and do a male challenge. He'd do shoulder swaying and looking quite aggressive. And then after he'd done his display and he thought nobody was looking, he would come forward to the glass and he'd give me a kiss through the glass,
Wow. Say hi.
as if to say, hi, I have to do this. You understand this, don't you? And
I absolutely love
so
you.
Boris is definitely my favorite animal at Chester Zoo.
Lovely. Professor Dr. Wright, thank you for sharing your insights today with the WASA community. From your journey to your future vision and even, your downtime. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and a big warm hug to all at WASA. Thank you for being such a wonderful organization.
Thank you. And for everyone watching, we'll link to Chester Zoo's website below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more interviews that will be coming. Gordon, any final message for our global zoo and aquarium community?
Keep working for conservation and work in cooperation with one another.
Thanks again. And thank you all for tuning in. Thank you.